So we have Parshas Vayetze, and which is this week's Parsha. Vayetze means and he went out and he left, and the Parsha opens up talking about Yaakov leaving Beersheba, which is where he was, where he lived with Avram, with Yitzchak, his father, and his twin brother Esav. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheba, and Yaakov went out from, departed Beersheba, he went to Haran, so it's called Vayetze. Now, at the end of last week's Parsha, the Torah already told us that Yaakov left Beersheba to go to Haran because Rivka, his mother, knew that Esav was going to try to kill him because Yaakov had, to a degree, Yaakov with Rivka's assistance tricked Yitzchak into giving the blessings Yitzchak had intended to give to Esav. Rivka and Yaakov tricked Yitzchak into giving them to Yaakov. Truth be told, those brachas legitimately belonged to Yaakov. Esav had sold them to him for a pot of lentil soup. And rather than tell Yitzchak, by the way, your son Esav, who you think so highly of, FYI, he sold his birthright and his blessings to me for a pot of soup, rather than have to hurt Yitzchak by telling him that, they just tricked Yitzchak into giving them to Yaakov, and that way Yitzchak never needed to know. But Esav was upset, frustrated, angry, and Esav, being a not just aggressive but a violent man, was out to get Yaakov. Rivka knew about this. So again, Rivka didn't want to tell Yitzchak that, by the way, your son Esav, he wants to kill his twin brother Yaakov. So instead of doing that, Rivka came to Yitzchak and convinced him that he needs to send Yaakov away to go find a wife in her hometown in Haran. So Yitzchak told Yaakov, leave, go to Haran, and make yourself a life there, find a wife there from Rivka's family, from your mother's family. So Yaakov left Beersheba and went to Haran. That's where last week's Parsha ends up. This week's Parsha opens up, and Yaakov departed Beersheba and went to Haran, which is a direct repetition of the end of last week's Parsha. Now, in Torah generally, everything is, to say concise would be an understatement. There are, first of all, in the Gemara, there are conversations about the Mishnah, about not just what the Mishnah says, but the choice of words and the structure of the words and the structure of the sentence. And if it said it like this and it could have said it like that, and there's an extra bit here and something missing over there, that means it's meant to tell us this and not that. And we do that certainly of the level of psukim, right? There are times when there are halachas practically that we keep today and we learn it from the fact that the Torah spelled a word. It could have left out the vav and it put the vav in. It could have left out the yud or the aleph and it put it in, and so we change our behavior. So if the Torah is so particular to be concise that there wouldn't be a single extra letter in a word unless it had a function, then if the Torah repeats this whole thing that Yaakov left Beersheba and went to Haran, said it last week, says it this week again, if it's repeating that, you can be sure that there's a very important function in that repetition. Which means that there has to be a very, very fundamental message to these words. And there is. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Yaakov's journey to Haran and what happened there. He went to Haran, he went to work for Lavan, who was his cousin. Let's say not a character who was known for his best intentions or for good faith. He was always out to rip people off and scam them and take whatever he could, regardless of the extent to which is at the other person's expense. And that includes Yaakov, his cousin. And it wasn't just Lavan. Lavan also lived in a place called Haran. The word Haran comes from Haranaf, which means fury. This is the fury of the world. He lived in a place Lavan was perfectly at home in Haran. That was the culture. It was a culture of just dark behavior and dark character traits. It was a very unpleasant place. The complete opposite of Beersheba. And Beersheba also, the name Beersheba, Sheva means seven, Also, if you change around the vowels, you could get Shavua, which means oath. It's called Be'ersheba because of the oath that Avimelech made to make peace with the Yidden and to not, have any animosity towards the Jews. The name of Be'ersheba was a name that was associated with things being calm, stable, peaceful, positive. And that's where Yaakov grew up. Yaakov grew up in Yitzchak's home. He sat on Torah every day. Things were calm and wholesome and stable. And he went from Beersheba to Haran, which is the diametric opposite. It was just a horrible place filled with people of horrible character, not least of all Lavan, his cousin, who he had to go and negotiate and deal with for the 20 years that he was there. And what's interesting is that out of all the forefathers, the three forefathers, F-O-R-E fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov was the only one who had nachas from all his children. Avraham had Ishmael, who caused him no end of distress. Yitzchak had Esav, who caused, Yitzchak was mostly in the dark to it, but caused his mother Rivka, and in reality, just not being a good person, he caused his mother Rivka no end of distress and would just lived a negative life. So Avram, and then Avram had other sons also afterwards. So the majority of Avram's first generation offspring of his children didn't give him nachas, to say the least. 50% of Yitzchak's children didn't give him nachas. Yaakov's the only one who got nachas from all of his children. All his children lived a life according to, in line with the way he lived his and perpetuated his legacy. And it's interesting that Avram and Yitzchak basically spent the majority of their life, let's say relatively stable, doing good things, involved in positive. And Yaakov's the one who left and went out into a place filled with negativity. Before he even started his family, he was there for 7 years before he got married. And somehow, despite the fact that he was the only one who was subjected to such negative circumstances over a prolonged period of time, he's the only one who got nachas from 100% of his children. And this is a very big part of the message, or perhaps this is the primary message. And that is, it's repeating to us, it's telling us again. It told us last week, and Yaakov left to go to Haran to find a wife. And then this week's Torah portion starts up again and repeats it again. Yaakov, on his way to find a wife, before he started establishing a family, Yaakov left Beersheba. He left the place of spiritual wholesomeness and stability and went to Haran, went to a place that was the diametric opposite. That was what he did. He didn't shy away from encountering the spiritual challenges that the world has to offer, let's say. And not only did...
But before he did that, he spent 14 years in Shiva.
Right, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to, first we're talking about what he did, and then we're going to talk about all the preparation and things he put into place to make it secure. Because if we're going to take a lesson about not shying away from things, we also have to understand the precaution and the system we have to have in place to make sure that it doesn't go wrong, because it could. Correct, excellent. So, Yaakov didn't shy away from all the negativity the world has to offer. I don't know if offer is quite the right word, but he didn't shy away from that and hide from it. And not only did his legacy and his nachas not suffer as a result, he ended up having a greater legacy and more nachas than any of the other ones did. So it clearly didn't cost anything in terms of legacy and nachas, encountering these parts of the world. And the truth is, if we think about it, just in terms of the bigger picture, as much as at first glance it might seem to not make much sense at all, it actually makes a whole lot of sense. As soon as we stop and think about why we're here, why is the universe here, why do time and space exist, Hashem didn't need any of those things, right? Hashem is the only entity that exists by definition that necessarily needs to exist by definition is Hashem. Everything other than Hashem exists because Hashem voluntarily chose to make it exist. That's true of the physical universe, it's true of mass, it's true of energy, it's true of time, it's true of space, it's true of Hashem's infinite radiance, it's true of everything other than Hashem. Hashem exists by definition because the nature of Hashem is that Hashem exists. Everything else exists because Hashem chose to make it exist. If Hashem chose to make it exist and chooses to make it continue to exist, there's obviously a reason, or Hashem wouldn't. If the purpose of existence was for there to be spirituality and spiritual wholesomeness, and that's all it was about, Hashem would have created spirituality and Hashem's infinite divine radiance and angels and all the spiritual worlds, and then it would have stopped there. This world has a whole lot to offer that seems to be in direct contrast to all of that. And if that was the point, it's not a very good idea to have created this world. Now, Hashem doesn't make a mistake in his math. So if Hashem continued after all of those things existed, the spirituality and Atzilus and Bria and Yetzirah and angels and divinity and all of that exists, Hashem went one step further and did create this material world filled with things that are a challenge to spirituality and to divinity and to godliness. In other words, a world that has a lot of negativity or negative in it. There's obviously a reason why having all of that spirituality existing wasn't enough without this world existing. Otherwise, Hashem would have stopped there. Obviously, that wasn't enough. Hashem specifically wanted to have this physical, material world with negativity in it to exist. And the truth is that really, in davening on Friday night, we say in L'chododi, Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. The end of action is at the beginning of thought. Now, to say that in other words, kind of, to paraphrase, there's an expression that says you always find something in the last place you look. Right? Everybody knows that. But the truth is, it's a bit of a ridiculous thing to say. Because if you're looking for something and you find it and you keep on looking for it, maybe you should get some help. Right? You obviously find something in the last place you look because when you find it, you stop looking because the only reason you were looking was in order to find it. You weren't looking for the sake of looking, you were looking to find it. So obviously you find it in the last place you look because then you're going to stop looking by definition. That's the way things work. Now, let's say you walk into a room and you see someone frantically picking things up and putting them down and opening and closing closets and opening and closing drawers and looking everywhere. And it's very clear that they're looking frantically for something. You have no idea what they're looking for. There's a very simple way you could find out what they're looking for without asking any questions, just by observing. And that is when you see them pick something up and stop looking, you know that's the thing they were looking for. Right? Because the process of searching stops when you find the thing you were searching for. That was the whole point. Now, generally speaking, when a person's looking for something, they're not looking because they said, oh, I want to look for something. What should I look for? Oh, let me look for that thing. Right? Generally what happens is, oh, I need my keys. Oh, where are my keys? I should look for them. So I look for the things. I look for my keys, I pick things up, I put them down, I open drawers, I close drawers. Why am I opening and closing drawers and closets and picking things up and putting them down? Not because I want to, because I want my keys. The last thing I'm going to do is pick up my keys and find them. And I'm not going to do any more picking up, putting down, opening and closing. The last thing I do is pick up the keys. What was the first thing I thought about? I want my keys. Sof ma'aseh, the end of action, is always by definition going to be b'machshava tchila, the first thing you thought about. Why? What do we think about? We think about something that interests us. Then we say, oh, this interests me. I want my keys, or I feel like having salad. Okay, I feel like eating a salad now, I want to eat a salad. So in order to eat a salad, I have to make a salad. In order to make a salad, I have to prepare the ingredients. In order to prepare the ingredients, I have to have the ingredients. I go to the fridge, I look and see if I have the ingredients. If I'm missing ingredients, I go and buy them. I get the ingredients, I prepare them, I toss the salad, I dress the salad, I eat it. What did I think about first? Eating the salad. Then I thought about preparing the salad. Then I thought about the ingredients. What did I actually do? Got the ingredients, prepared the salad, ate the salad. So by definition, the order of actions is always going to be the exact opposite of the order of thoughts. We think about, no one wakes up and says, oh, let me get ingredients for a salad. Why? I don't know. I want to get ingredients for a salad. I mean, someone might, but like that's not generally the way things work. And then you go, oh, I'm getting ingredients for a salad. Maybe I should make a salad. I mean, if someone has a hard time eating salad, maybe that would be a good way to go about it, to make sure you have the ingredients. But ultimately, the reason you're doing that is because you want to get yourself to have the salad. So you're still doing it for the salad, right? So we think salad, eat salad, prepare salad, ingredients. What we do is ingredients, prepare salad, eat salad. So if Ma said, of course you find something in the last place you look, because you were only looking to find the thing. And when you find it, you stop looking. Now, to be fair, I'm not bashing the expression. Obviously, what the expression, the point of the expression is that Murphy's Law is you always find something in the last place you think to look. That's what it really means to say, because you're always going to find it in the last place you look because you're going to stop looking, right? So if you see someone involved in a process, let's say, for example, just to illustrate the extent to which this is true and how deep it runs, let's say someone's working hard, and they say, I'm really working hard because I need to have $100,000 in the bank to feel stable and secure. So I'm working really hard until I can accumulate that. And once I have that, I'll feel safe and then I'll stop working so hard. And then they get $100,000 in the bank and they keep on going. Well, it's like they didn't stop once they got there. So if the reason they were working was to have $100,000 in savings and they got $100,000 in savings and they're still working, something's wrong with the math. Or the person misunderstood what their real motivator was. They thought that they're working to get 100 grand in savings to feel secure. They didn't realize that either that 100 grand is not going to give them the sense of security they think it's going to give them, or really they just feel driven to work hard. And it was never about the money. It was never about the savings. It was about the work. Or maybe they're just a person who likes having a lot of money and they want more and more and more. But the fact that they didn't stop working when they reached the goal doesn't tell us that the rule that you stop working when you reach the goal isn't true. It just tells us that they misunderstood what their goal really was deep down. Because the bottom line is, if that was the goal, they would have stopped or they would have slowed down. So if Hashem has his infinite divine radiance, and then Hashem has Tzimtzum and reduces that to make space for existence and ego. And then Hashem starts to reintroduce divinity and creates Atzilus, and then Bria, with angels in Bria, and then Yetzirah, and angels in Yetzirah. And all of that's there. And then Hashem continues to create the physical reality with all the things in it. What that tells us is that all those things before were part of the process to get here. Really, the ultimate objective is the physical reality with all the negativity and everything else inside of it. If the objective was the spirituality, that was already there before this world. So obviously, if that was the objective, Hashem would have stopped. He wouldn't have continued to create this world. If the order of creation was negative or physical world filled with negativity, and then Hashem created the spirituality afterwards, you could have said, really, it's about the spirituality, and this was on the way to get there. But that's not the way it was. This came last. The spirituality was already there. So if Hashem, having already created all the spiritual layers of reality and the angels and all of that, still went on to create this world, it means all of that wasn't enough. And really, it was always about this. This physical reality with all the negativity is the ultimate objective. And when Hashem got here, he stopped creating. There are no further layers because you always find something in the last place you look. Having created the world that was ultimately of greatest interest to Hashem, stopped creating. There's no need for anything further because this is what it's all about. So we have very clear evidence of the fact that ultimately what's of greatest interest to Hashem, or the greatest value proposition to Hashem, is this physical material world with all the negativity that exists within it. The question is how and why. And ultimately what it boils down to is that there's something very special about taking something that has negativity in it and uplifting it, elevating it, introducing godliness and divinity into that. That's a lot more unique and a lot more special and a lot more profoundly valuable and meaningful than just angels and spirituality as they are, because that's just what they are. Big deal. There's nothing unusual about it. There's no complexity. There's nothing novel. But to take something material, something that's even maybe negative, and to uplift that and integrate godliness and divinity into that, That's novel. And that there's a certain, sometimes there can be a special beauty in simplicity, but there's also a beauty that comes along with complexity. And the complexity of combining, and it's more about the novelty really than the complexity. And the achievement of taking something material, something that is so out of touch with spirituality and divinity, and to integrate spirituality and divinity and godliness into it, that's novel. And that means so much more than just the spirituality that just is because that's the way it is. So in going to Haran and confronting the world as it is, not Be'er Sheva, not a place that has made its peace with the Jewish people and Torah mitzvahs and is about natural spiritual wholesomeness, but by confronting the world with everything that's in it and making sure to do that the right way, Yaakov was actually fulfilling the purpose of the existence of everything all the way up to time and space. Because all of that exists, time, space, spiritual layers of reality, physical layer of reality, everything other than Hashem himself. Hashem exists because Hashem exists by definition. The Torah philosophy terminology in Hebrew, the technical terminology is mechuyav hametzias. Hashem's existence is obligatory. By definition of what Hashem is, Hashem just exists. And it's not, Hashem can't not exist. But there's nothing else that couldn't not exist. Everything else, including Ein Sof, including Hashem's infinite divine radiance, could not exist. Hashem could not radiate if he wanted to. All of that exists just to facilitate the existence of a material world in which divinity is not naturally perceived. We are not naturally receptive to divinity as human beings in physical bodies, and neshamas are. But as human beings that have a neshama buried deep inside, and we're primarily a physical Homo sapiens animal body with a Homo sapiens animal soul, and I'm choosing those words specifically to illustrate strongly the fact that we are human beings, first and foremost, in terms of our conscious experience. Our consciousness is a Homo sapiens, human animal consciousness. That's not to say that the neshama is not the most important part of us, but our conscious experience is primarily just human being. And for us to be here as human beings and to integrate godliness and divinity into our lives as Homo sapiens animals, as human beings, and to take that into integrated into our environment, into the world around us, that's the whole point of everything. So when Yaakov encountered the world, confronted the world, and dealt with the world as a human being with a relationship with the world, he was able to introduce and integrate divinity, godliness, infinity into everything. And that was the whole point. If Yaakov had stayed in Beersheba his whole life and just studied Torah in his tent, studying Torah is amazing. Doing mitzvahs is amazing. But had he stayed and kept his Torah mitzvahs to himself and never confronted the world, for the same price, Hashem could have never created this world and just had the angels. And that's not what Hashem wanted. Hashem created this world. Clearly, Hashem does want divinity to be integrated into the physical world, the material world. Integrate means to work it in together and make it become part of one thing. So by doing, when Yaakov, and the Torah tells us, Yaakov, before he even got married, before he started working to establish a family, the thing that he did that in many ways is responsible for or contributed to the fact that he was the one who had 100% nachas is because he did leave Be'er Sheva. He did leave that place where life was spiritually wholesome and there was no challenges and no negativity and none of the more challenging parts of the human condition were really tested. He went to Haran. He encountered the world. And because that is the whole point of everything, Yaakov went to Haran, which meant he was able to integrate infinity, divinity, elokus, godliness into the parts of the world where maybe it's needed the most.
But he didn't change anything when he left.
He took things with him, but everything he generated that he was able to take with him, he generated as a result of being there and interacting with things, right? And the wealth, the fact that the wealth that he generated primarily in sheep, those were sheep of Haran, and he elevated them and took them with him. Had he not gone there, those sheep would have, yeah. But ultimately, they were people from Haran also. His wives were from Haran, and the sheep were from Haran. He changed them into something that didn't belong there anymore. And also, you know, chances are, I think it's fair to say that there would have been some remnants of an impact that he left behind him also. So, Yaakov, now, if it's true that this is the purpose of existence of everything from time and space and all the way through everything else, it can't be the case that by engaging in making a dir b'tachtonim and bringing godliness into the world and into the places where it's needed the most, we're going to end up worse off. Because if that's what Hashem created the world for, Hashem has to have created an infrastructure that allows us to do that without getting hurt in the process. Now, just to illustrate, you know, I want to just give a metaphor to clarify something here, because Avram and Yitzchak were bringing godliness into the world. They were learning Torah in the world. They were doing mitzvahs in the world. Avram Avinu, you know, informed people and educated people about Hashem. And Avram and Yitzchak did amazing things. It's not like they didn't do anything of value. But just to illustrate the difference in, let's say, in the ROI, in the return on their investment. If, very simple example, you know, I'll tell you, there's a corner store just down the road from down the block from where I live. And, you know, it's not uncommon that there's someone out the front of the corner store that says, hey, do you have any spare change? I want to get something to eat. And it's not uncommon that I'll say, you know, I don't have any change on me, but come inside and buy a sandwich and a bottle of water and I'll swipe it for you happily. Do that very often. Now, let's say that I spend $5 on breakfast and this person is not hungry anymore now because I spent $5 on breakfast. Think about, let's make the number a little bit bigger so we're talking about something more substantial. So let's say that I have $100 available and it costs, let's say, $5 per time I buy someone breakfast on this corner. With $100, I could either make 20 people not be hungry, or I could make the same person not be hungry 20 times, but we could have 20 events of eliminating someone's hunger in the moment by buying them food. If you take $100 US and you spend it on feeding hungry people in Rwanda, you're going to get a lot more value out of that $100 than you're getting out of feeding someone here, for a whole range of reasons. But the bottom line is, when someone's actually clinically starving, they're getting, you know, if someone didn't have breakfast today and they've eaten, they're fine, like they're hungry and they don't really know how they're getting breakfast today, but they're not dying of hunger anytime soon. The difference, if you buy them a slice of bread, honestly, the person's probably going to be offended and say, what are you giving me a slice of bread for? Do I look like an animal to you? Very likely, right? The person's not about to die of hunger. They're not necessarily going to appreciate your slice of bread. If you go to a place where people are literally dying of malnutrition and you offer someone a slice of bread, they're going to be extremely grateful. So first of all, because of how much of a deficit there is, every little bit is worth much, much, much more. And the person who ate a decent dinner last night and just didn't have breakfast yet, they're not that hungry that the breakfast is going to be like life-changing for them. Someone who's malnourished their whole life and you give them a substantial breakfast to eat, it's going to be life-changing. It's going to change the course of their life for the next period of time. So the same investment in circumstances in which the need is much more dire gives a much greater reward. $100 spent buying food and clean water for people who are actually dying of malnutrition and lack of clean water is going to give you, if you could potentially, hypothetically, measure the benefit in human experience and how much better the human experience became multiplied by the number of people that improvement happened for $100 in a place like that, and you compare that to the improvement in the human experience for buying 100 people breakfast who are nowhere near, being in a dangerous state of malnutrition, the benefit to the collective human experience in a place in which there is severe hunger and malnutrition is going to be immeasurably greater, incomparable, maybe not immeasurably technically, but incomparably greater. So yes, Avram and Yitzchak were doing good things and learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and helping people and doing positive things, but you can't compare the magnitude of the impact that had doing it in Beersheba, in a place that's already calm and secure and stable and spiritually wholesome, to taking that same divinity, godliness, infinity, and integrating it into bringing it, introducing it to a place that's completely devoid of anything positive and is just a place filled with negativity and filled with people who've only ever had the opportunity to develop negative characteristics and character traits and behaviors because that's all they've ever known or been exposed to. You go to a place like that, every little bit of positivity you bring is going to make a huge impact. So we're not saying that doing good things is ever useless or a waste of time. We're not saying Avraham and Yitzchak didn't dedicate their lives to doing incredible things. But Yaakov, let's say, and I'm going to say this in a way that's maybe a little bit borderline disrespectful, but Yaakov had the guts to go and do it in the place where it was needed most. And why is it that, very frankly, I'll be somewhat self-critical, why is it that I buy these people breakfast on the corner and I didn't go to Rwanda and bring bread and water to people who are dying of malnutrition? Obviously, a whole host of reasons. No one ever offered me the opportunity, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot easier. Right? It's a lot easier to walk into the corner store down the road from me and swipe my credit card and buy a sandwich and a bottle of water for someone when I'm passing by anyways on my way to Dublin or to go to work, than it is to get into a place and go to a place where you're going to be confronting extraordinary human suffering and to bring the help and the positivity there. And, as is generally the case, the cost and the benefit are proportional. So yes, the benefit that you can introduce in a place like that is massive, but you know what? The cost is also bigger, even just in terms of the experience of having to confront those things. Baruch Hashem, I don't see those things. And, also Baruch Hashem, the number of people in the world who are at that level of malnutrition, etc., is going down by the day and by the hour. Yeah, I rather, very simply, as a human being, I'd rather, if I'm going to help someone, I'd rather do it in a way that's easier and more comfortable. Yaakov didn't say, I'm going to bring godliness and divinity into the world in the way that's comfortable and in the stable environment that's already spiritually wholesome. Yaakov said, if I go to Haran, a place that's completely devoid of positivity, that's the place that needs it the most. That's where I'm going to get the greatest ROI. That's where I'm going to get the greatest bang for my buck. It's also the place that's going to be uncomfortable and difficult and challenging. But you know what? This is what the world is here for. If the reason Hashem wasn't satisfied with creating spirituality and Hashem went on to create this world was because of the value of the novelty and achievement and creation that exists in bringing godliness and divinity into something that's mundane and devoid of it naturally, if the value of bringing godliness into a place that's lacking godliness is so valuable that that's the whole point of creating everything, then Yaakov said, well, if that's the whole point, where can I do that to the greatest extent? In Haran, a lot more than in Beersheba. So the Torah says, and it repeats it a second time, yes, when Yaakov was going to build a family, Yaakov did not shy away from doing what he was supposed to. Yaakov left Beersheba, a place of spiritual stability and wholesomeness, and went to Haran, to a place that was the diametric opposite. And the Torah repeats it to make the point again. This is the point. The point is bringing godliness into places in which it's not naturally radiant or felt or integrated. This is true generally of this entire physical reality. And within this physical reality, it's true to varying degrees in different parts of the reality. And that's why Yaakov didn't suffer a result of doing this, because Yaakov was fulfilling the purpose of creation to the greatest extent that it ever happened. So if we think about what that means, if this is really what Hashem always wanted the most, and he was fulfilling Hashem's deepest desire to a greater degree and in a deeper way than Avraham and Yitzchak had, what's going to happen as a result? He is going to have a deeper connection to Hashem. Having a deeper connection to Hashem is going to and did get him through all of those challenges, and he came out on the other side better than Avraham and Yitzchak. So that's, generally speaking, broadly, the Torah is repeating that to emphasize this idea that yes, he did leave Beersheba and he did go to Haran. Right? In creating this physical reality, Hashem effectively did that. Hashem, wasn't just satisfied with, let's say, the Beersheba of all of the spiritual layers of reality, which are all wholesome and beautiful and spiritually stable, etc. And Hashem created this world, which is relative to the spiritual layers of reality, like the Haran of all of Hishtalshelus, the Haran of all the layers of existence. And so Yaakov did the same thing. That being said, we also have to be practical and smart and safe about how we confront parts of the world that are, let's say, devoid of godliness, parts of the world that are more negative, parts of the world where there's a greater need for godliness and divinity to be integrated. Because, the fact is, look around, right? Look around. I'm going to speak for myself. I have to look around. I can look in the mirror to see instances of encountering challenges that the world has to offer and maybe not successfully overcoming them 100%. Right? So it's not necessarily always a wise idea to say, ooh, that's a really big challenge. That's a place that's like super negative. Let me go there and quote unquote bring some godliness there. And then next thing we know is who knows what. Right? So we have to be wise and intentional and careful about doing this in a way that's safe, doing this in a way that's realistically likely to end up with a positive outcome. Now, there are a few parts of that. Number one is, being selective about the parts of the world that we do expose ourselves to. Because yes, the more material or negative something is, the greater the potential for uplifting and novelty and integrating godliness in a way that's new. But that's only going to be worth anything if we succeed. So it's very important to make sure that we are careful. We don't hide away in our room and just learn Torah and do mitzvahs and hide away from the world. But we also have to make sure that we're selective about what we do expose ourselves to, so that we're exposing ourselves, we're giving ourselves, right? The whole point of it is to have greater achievement. That value is only going to happen if we actually overcome the challenge and achieve. So we've got to be selective about what we expose ourselves to. And it's not just about how big the challenge is, it's also the variety of the challenge. Right, and it varies from person to person, and for a given person, it varies across different times in our lives, and etc. Different people are going to be, let's say, at greater risk of ending up not succeeding in bringing godliness into a negative environment or a challenging environment. Different people are at more risk with different varieties of challenges. Different people also have a different magnitude of how high a risk they're going to be secure in facing. So if there's a risk that is maybe, our likelihood of success is starting to look a little bit shaky, it's a good idea not to be in a rush to encounter it. Because the point of the encountering those environments is to elevate them, not to have them bring us down. So if there's a substantial risk of them bringing us down, number one, it's a good idea to give it a pass for now. Another thing is that when we are going to encounter the world, to confront parts of the world that, let's say, have a lot of room for elevation and for improvement and to be uplifted, we also want to make sure that we're going in prepared and strong and healthy so that our chances of success are the best they can be. And so let's say, what was Yaakov doing practically? Yaakov was going to a new country, new language, new culture.
It's like shlichus.
It's exactly shlichus, 100%.
It's like this, what shluchim do now.
100%, that's exactly what it is.
They need to protect, like, be very strong, take it outside, be in a place that it's not easy for them.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly the message. The message of this is shlichus, basically. Now, what shlichus is for different people might mean different things. But that's the message. The message is go out, don't be afraid of the world. Instead of cowering from the world, make the world cower before you and fill the world with godliness and divinity. Now, when going to a new place, let's say that a person is going on shlichus to a different country. It does make sense that they should probably try to learn the language. Sorry?
So they don't always do that.
They'll learn the language over time, right? And maybe part of that is the message from Yaakov here. Let's say that a person is going to a place that is very culturally different to the place that they grew up in. It's probably a good idea to be aware of some of the, the fundamental aspects of this culture so that you can deal with people in a way that's likely to not blow up in everybody's face. And all those things are important, and it is important to be practical, to be pragmatic, and to, take a practical approach and to look at things practically and to figure out what we can do to maximize our chances of success. But ultimately, sometimes a person can do everything right, and it doesn't work out the way they hoped, right? Sometimes a person thought they did everything right, but they really didn't realize they missed something. And sometimes a person really did everything right. And you know what? Hashgacha pratis, destiny, whatever you want to call it, this is the way it worked out. So preparation is not, the preparation in terms of getting familiar with the culture and the language and preparing all these different sorts of things and financially, whatever else it is, these preparations are not the be all and end all. Ultimately, if there was one factor that we could describe as being the be all and end all, the one factor that will decide whether or not we succeed, what would that one factor be? Exactly, Hashem. That doesn't mean we should ignore the practical side of things, but it does mean if we know that our likelihood of succeeding and the likelihood of the effort we put in to our practical preparation, the likelihood of that preparation succeeding depends on Hashem determining whether or not it succeeds. Then number one is Hashem. Step number one is Hashem. Get in touch with Hashem, connect, plug in, pray. Do the things we need to do to connect and to increase our relationship, improve and strengthen and deepen our relationship with Hashem, our connection to the source of blessing and success. Then, on top of that foundation, build a practical approach that connection with Hashem and that blessing can flow into and make succeed. Right? If a person prays to Hashem and davens and davens and davens, it says on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem decides how much income we're going to have during the year. So does that mean that we daven on Rosh Hashanah and then we sit down, watch Netflix with our feet up on the table for 12 months and say, well, Hashem, no, it doesn't work that way. Hashem decided how much income we have the capacity to earn and how much income will come to us through our efforts if we put them in correctly. That's not to say there's no such thing as an exception and, random things happening and people making a lot of money out of the blue. That can happen, and that's also determined on Rosh Hashanah. But the fact that Hashem determines on Rosh Hashanah what we're going to earn is not a contradiction to the fact that we need to just be practical. It's not either or, it's both. It's just that if Hashem decides at the beginning of the year that someone, God forbid, is not going to make any money and have zero income, they can work and work and work and work and work and nothing's going to happen because Hashem decided there's nothing's going to happen. So first we have Rosh Hashanah. Then once on Rosh Hashanah, Hashem determines how much we have the capacity to earn, we get out and do the work. And it's not just money. Money is like the most common thing. It's true of our mental and emotional well-being and our physical health and our relationships and our sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life. All of these things, Hashem determines what we're able to have during the year, but we have to get out and make it happen. So yes, Yitzchak had to do those things, but what's the first thing that the Torah tells us? Yaakov departed Beersheba to go to Haran. What's the first thing that happened on the way? Vayifka b'makom, and he encountered a place and he rested there. And when it says he encountered a place, Rashi tells us, and Midrashim tell us, he davened, he prayed. Step number one, Yaakov knew, yes, I've got to go there. Yes, this is what the world is about. And yes, I have to be practical and wise about doing this in a way that makes sense. But step number one before any of that is to daven to Hashem. Because ultimately it's Hashem who's going to determine to what degree my efforts succeed effectively in generating the outcome that I'm trying to generate. Hashem is going to determine the extent to which I get to see the fruits of my labor. So step number one is daven to Hashem. Because Hashem is the factor that ultimately determines everything else. The other things we have to work on are factors that we're responsible to take care of, but they may or may not succeed. There's no such thing as Hashem may or may not succeed. Hashem may or may not decide for us to succeed. So step number one, daven to Hashem. Step number two, what was the next thing that Yaakov did? So Yaakov wanted to go to sleep. Sorry? Yes, he learned for 14 years. When Yaakov went to sleep that night after davening, what did he do?
He surrounded his head with stones.
Right, surrounded his head with stones. What about his hands and feet? Like, would it have been okay if a tiger came and like bit off his arms and legs and ate his heart and then his head was fine? Like, yeah, no, what? Right, so obviously there's going to be some sort of allegorical meaning here. And that is, again, practically speaking, we are responsible. Hashem expects of us and demands of us to be practically responsible people, which means that if there's something you need in life, you've got to figure out a strategy to work on making that happen and then do what you can do to make it happen. There's a pasuk that says, Yegia kapecha kisoicha. Ashrecha v'tovlach. The toil of your hands, kisoicha, when you eat from the work of your hands, it will be good for you. You will be fortunate and it will be good for you. It's very healthy to work and be responsible and work towards generating the things that we want to have and see in our lives. But it says very specifically, it says Yigia, the work, but it gives us a description. What kind of the work? The work of your hands. If, let's say, a person needs to generate a certain amount of income to be responsible to their family, they need to figure out how to make that happen. But that should be primarily work they're doing with their hands, not with their head. Now, just to clarify, that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with having a job in which we use our minds or we think. And it doesn't mean that if we have a job in which we're responsible to our employer for our salary to use our head, we should say, well, really, I should just use my hands. I'm not going to do it properly. That's called stealing. What it does mean is that what our mind is primarily invested in and focused on should be the things that are really of utmost importance and priority to us, which is Hashem, family, people, the things that are actually going to make our life meaningful and purposeful and fulfilling. Is more money going to make our life more fulfilling and meaningful? 100% not. Guaranteed. To be clear, this is not advocating for trying to live a life of poverty, because when a person doesn't have enough to meet their needs, it can introduce many, many challenges, mental, emotional, and spiritual, and physical, not having enough. And the data do indicate that as a person approaches financially, having enough financially to meet their needs, their quality of life does substantially improve, right? Obviously, if we're missing things that we need, that's going to take a toll on our quality of life. The data also showed very clearly that once a person has enough financially for their needs to be met, to live a menschlich, a decent life, as financial resources, let's say, continue to increase, there is no further increase in quality of life. So yes, a deficit takes a toll, but having more than we need doesn't bring any meaning fulfillment, satisfaction, or purpose to life. It doesn't. Does having more wholesome and deep and strong connections and relationships to the people who are important to us bring those things? Of course it does. And there's no limit. I'd say the sky is the limit, but the sky is not even the limit. It's infinite. The more we put into the important relationships in our lives, the more benefit and the more our quality of life is going to increase. Very simple. That's true of the people who are important to us. That's true of our connection and relationship with Hashem. It's true with our connection and relationship with our sense of meaning and purpose and our mission in life and why we're here. All of those things, the more we put into them, the more we'll get out, and there is no limit. The more we put into learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, bringing godliness into the world, the more benefit we create for the world and for ourselves. So if those are the things that are really going to make the biggest contribution to our life, and those are the things that are most important to us, those are the things we should be thinking about first thing when we open our eyes in the morning and wake up. Those are the things that should be racing through our mind or circulating in our mind as we close our eyes and try to fall asleep. Should we be working to be financially stable? Yes, we should, but with our hands, not with our minds and hearts. Doesn't mean we can't think and put our minds and hearts into it, but it means that should not be what has the primary attention of our mind and heart. That should be what has the attention of our hands and feet and whatever we need to do. Our mind and heart need to be protected because, and this is something that, it's so important to be aware of and have clarity in, because it can be a source inadvertently of just so much, first of all, of a loss of potential sense of purpose and meaning and fulfillment in life. And ultimately, if it continues to, I'd say escalate, but deteriorate, it can ultimately lead to a lot of pain and suffering in life. And that is just losing focus on what's important. A person can be putting in effort and working hard, but if we just, and today with the nature of life and technology and everything, it's the risk of this happening is so high and the prevalence of it is so high that we could be working hard and putting in effort, but if we're working hard and putting in effort into the things that are not actually going to make our life any more meaningful and fulfilling. And, I don't say this in a way of judgment. Or first of all, obviously it's not my job to judge, but second of all, this can happen really insidiously without us realizing. And it happens so slowly over time that, with the technology in our phones and work and all these things, which do have an important role to play in our lives, but slowly they start to take over. And then we get our focus and emphasis on the things that do bring the purpose and meaning gets hijacked towards the things that don't bring us purpose and meaning. The purpose and meaning are going to start to wane. And our focus starts more and more to go into things that don't give us any return and don't make our lives any better. And on the contrary, primarily perhaps because they end up replacing the things in our life that do have value and meaning to offer, it ends up actually just making our life go just downhill. So Yaakov put the stones around his head. We can afford to invest our bodies into things that are practical and pragmatic and we need to do for whatever it is. As long as our head is protected and we make sure that we are clear on what really is important to us, what are we really here for? What are the things that are actually going to bring purpose and meaning to my life and make my life better? As long as our head is protected and we retain that quality and that focus on those things, we can put our hands into other things. We can put our feet, our bodies into other things. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, you're never, ever allowed to be involved in anything other than Torah mitzvahs, right? We're supposed to, and we need to be responsible and to do those other things. But whatever other things we need to do to be a responsible person, it's important. And, that may involve using technology, etc., all these kind of things. That doesn't mean we should allow those things to take over our head. And the moment they co-opt our head, it's the beginning of the end, let's say. Yeah. And that's why Yaakov made sure to put the stones around his head, because that clarity and focus is of ultimate importance. And if our head is protected, we can handle all the other things. It's okay. We can get involved in things, without them taking over our lives, as long as we make sure that our head is protected, that focus and clarity is protected and maintained. And that's why Yaakov, number one, daven to Hashem. Number two, put stones around his head to make sure he's going to Haran. And you know what he did? He went to Haran and he did outsmart Lavan, who was a scam artist and a very good one at that. And he was out to get Yaakov and to take advantage of Yaakov. And you know what? Yaakov outsmarted him. And Yaakov got extremely wealthy on the back of that. But the whole time Yaakov was there, Yaakov remembered why he was there and why he wasn't there. And he knew that his objective in being there wasn't to outsmart Lavan. His objective in being there wasn't to get rich. His objective in being there was to establish a family and to bring Hashem and godliness and Torah mitzvahs into the world in this negative place. And he was clear about that. So he started by davening. He started by learning and setting a foundation that he would be standing on solid ground. And then he went there, protected his head, maintained that clarity. So even while he did outsmart Lavan and became wealthy, he never got sidetracked. He never forgot about why he was really there. So he was able to do all those things, no problem. And because he, number one, didn't shy away from offering godliness to the parts of the world that needed it most, he got out there and did that. And he also was very careful and strategic in making sure he did it in a way that was safe and secure and had the best chance of success by, number one, davening, number two, making sure he protected his head and that focus and clarity, and number three, making sure he had the learning under his belt.
What is number two?
Number three, Torah study. By having those things, he was able to go to Haran, outsmart Lavan and get wealthy, but not get carried away by it. And 20 years later, he left with a big, beautiful family that gave him 100% nachas that Avraham and Yitzchak didn't get.
He also had the bracha of his parents.
That's also true. So, yeah. So, there are two almost sort of opposite things to be aware of. Number one is that the darker the place in the world is, I don't say darker, the more in need a person or place is of Torah, mitzvahs, godliness, divinity, the greater the opportunity to achieve and make a real valuable outcome by bringing it there. Number one is we have to be careful that we're only taking on a challenge that we are, safe to succeed at. And number two, even when we do that, we have to make sure that we come into it with proper, well-informed, robust preparation in terms of connecting to Hashem through prayer. Ultimately, Hashem decides whether we're going to succeed. Everything might look all safe and dandy, and sometimes things just go south in a way that doesn't make sense. Hashem. Number one is daven. Make sure that we learn and we're plugged in and we are studying Torah every day at the beginning of the day. We are davening at the beginning of the day every day. And we're making time to protect our head, to make sure that we retain a conscious clarity in our purpose and our mission, in why we're here, and what are the things that do contribute purpose and meaning to my life. What are the things that are going to contribute towards me fulfilling the purpose of my existence? And what are not the things what things are not on that list? And if we can retain that clarity, we can afford to get involved with other things with our hands, with our feet, as long as we don't allow them to co-opt and to hijack our heads. Have a good one. Yes.
Wow. I just wanted to add something on that. It's very interesting because, even though Yaakov did everything, there's this huge mission, his story and all his kids, it was such a mess. I feel like even though he did something so hard, I don't think that means that it's gonna be easy. Going on Shlichus is not easy. That was such a mess. And the other day I actually hosted a meal of 100 people, don't ask. And a lot of people showed up, children of Shluchim, showed up, and I was speaking to a lot of people who were just they were telling me personally they don't keep Shabbos now, and this and that. It's such a mess within their families. It's interesting to see that you're doing something so great, and it is gonna come with a lot of challenges.
You look, no one ever said that because Yaakov was doing what he was supposed to do, it was going to be easy, right? 100% not. And generally speaking, the more on target we are, the greater the challenges end up being. because, Hashem created a system to make it difficult to do the right thing, which means the closer we get to that, the greater the resistance is going to be, and the more the challenges are going to be. So 100%, there's no saying that it's going to just be all fine and dandy and clean and tidy. There are a lot of challenges that come across along with it. And you know what? That all these stories, and it's unfortunately there's no shortage of them. It just illustrates the evidence that illustrates how important it is to be so careful and to not just say, oh, I'm going on shlichus, I'm doing the right thing, it's okay, whatever. No, it's imperative to make sure that we have those boundaries in place and that we have that structure in place, because
and that you stay connected with the
100%.
I find like the parallel from back then to now interesting, how even like Yaakov, like his family was such a mess. That whole story is like so messy.
It is.
To see how like even modern day like the same things happen.
Look, it's the thing is that these rules are they're like the fundamental laws of the thermodynamics of existence. Is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's the exact same thing. It's a law of physics, and it's a law of the entire multiverse, not just the physical layer. And the closer you get to something, the greater the positive, the greater the resistance is going to be. And the fact that Yaakov knew he had to daven and learn Torah and protect his head at all times, he knew that then. Nothing's changed. That's the nature of the universe. The nature of the universe hasn't changed. The laws of physics haven't changed, and neither have these laws. And so yes, 100%. It's as imperative now to remember how important it is that we make these things a priority, and we don't just assume that because we do. Yes, doing the right thing and confronting it does give us the greatest possible ROI opportunity. But no opportunity is guaranteed. And when you get a good ROI opportunity, that's the time when you really want to make sure you're doing your numbers right and being careful, because the biggest ROI opportunity also comes, by definition, is the biggest opportunity to miss out on the ROI.
Right, or where you're lost.
Right. So,
very good.
Everything that Yaakov did, where was the impact? Only in his family? Or do we see that he made an impact in the community as well?
Okay, that's a good question. So in terms of the Rebbe's emphasis on the Sikha, the Rebbe's talking about what we see in-house within his family. That we see that despite subjecting himself to, let's say, a high-risk situation, he didn't end up losing out. And the reason is because that's ultimately what he was supposed to do. And that being said, I don't think